Yeah, Sipho will join in a few problem with
Okay.
his Zoom, please. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. So we can get started. First of all, I have posted in the chat the Zoom link and the ID and password for the next meeting. This link will expire. I will give everyone 5 minutes before the link expires to move on to the next meeting. And secondly, these recordings will be uploaded to YouTube, and it will be sent, the links will be sent in a mailer and will be posted on our social media accounts. So first of all, thank you very much, Sharon. I'll introduce Sipho as well, so when he arrives later, everyone is familiar with him. We're very excited. Thank you so much to the PsySSA, South African Association for Counselling Psychologists. Today we are joined by Sharon Melrose and a little bit later, Sipho Dlamini. Sharon is a counselling psychologist in private practice, a psychology lecturer at the Cornerstone Institute, and the secretary of the South African Association for Counselling Psychologists. So Sharon is a busy lady. Thank you again for being here. Sharon has got her master's degree in counselling psychology, cum laude, busy girl, from Stellenbosch University, and has been in private practice for several years. Sharon, we're impressed. Sipho is also a counselling psychologist and a PhD candidate and an executive committee member of the South African Association for Counselling Psychologists. And Sipho is a researcher with UNISA at the South African Medical and Research Council, and an experienced student advisor with a demonstrated history of working in the higher education industry. So we are amidst very good company. Thank you again for being here. If we can start with first answering the question, what is counselling psychology?
Okay, so you've got a number of streams. So you've got your research, you've got your industrial psychologist, you've got your educational psychologist, and those are generally quite understandable and easy to pinpoint. There's a bit of confusion around the clinical and the counseling. So the counseling psychologist is somebody that's their focus area is on well-being, on strength and well-being. So when somebody is overwhelmed by a life event, such as they're going through a divorce, a relationship's broken up, bereavement, a child leaving home, a child starting school, those developmental milestones, those life stage crises that they go through, your counseling psychologist's focus is on what is the strength that they bring to the table? How do we enhance those strengths? So the focus is on the socio-emotional strength building, whereas your clinical is far more pathology based. Both require diagnostic skill. So for example, the couple going through a difficult time and come for couples counseling will go to traditionally, they will go to a counseling psychologist. But in that, I have to be well versed in picking up any diagnostic signs. If the one party has got a personality disorder, if somebody is suffering from a major depressive disorder, you've got to know all of those, because it changes the intervention that you're going to be using. But your focus is more on strength building and helping deal with the developmental crisis they're experiencing.
Thank you. That's a comprehensive answer. Sorry, if I may ask you to please mute yourself. There we go. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sharon. So we'll take the questions that we've received via social media and go through those questions first. And then we'd like to open up to our participants. So you can either send a message on the group chat platform, or you can unmute yourself and raise your hand and ask a question that way. And if you'd like to ask a question anonymously, you can message me privately. So our first question is, when considering counselling psychology masters, would it be beneficial to first complete a BPsych equivalent?
Okay, those are two, once again, like clinical and counseling are different focus areas. Your registered counselor and your counseling psychologist are different focus areas. Desperate need for registered counselors because they're almost the people working on the ground. So their expertise will be in the screening. So they'll be the first point of call. They will screen almost like you're triaging in a medical setting. Your registered counselor is there. They've got to have all their diagnostic skill as well. They don't diagnose, but they will identify who needs to move on to be helped by a psychologist, for example. So it's two different fields that you're going into. One, yes, far more sort of community-based, reaching many people. It is also a less expensive option than seeing a psychologist. Ideally, what we're wanting is we're wanting a psychologist working with a team of registered counselors. The registered counselor's scope is smaller than the psychologist. So should you do your B-Psych equivalent, it's going to take you into the direction of registered counselor and not into psychology as a psychologist. So the psychology, there's a stricter selection criteria and fewer people get selected for, say, a counseling psychology degree as opposed to registered. At Cornerstone, we take 20 B-Psych equivalents to go into registered counseling roles.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. That is a good question. A good question to ask, because I think one here is counseling psychology and registered counseling, and it's quite easy to confuse those two because they both say counseling.
Yeah.
Does a counseling psychologist have to do an internship after M1?
Absolutely. So now here we get the differentiation again between my clinical, my educational, and my counseling. Your clinical individual will be doing their internship, their practicum at a psychiatric unit like 𝐸𝑥𝑒𝑐ℎ𝑜𝑟𝑒𝑟 Hospital, one of those sort of ones. The clinical are also being expected to do a ComServe. I'm not sure why counseling don't do ComServe. I'm very much for them actually doing their ComServe year as well. You have to do your internship. So you do your academic training, which includes a thesis. Thereafter, you are in a practical placement under the guidance of a psychologist, where you then do your clinical training. That would normally be in either in a school setting or in a clinic setting where you are working with the people. So mine, for example, was in Wineland's Wynlandsielkundige Dienste, which was lovely because I worked with the 𝐸𝑐𝑒𝑟𝑠𝑡𝑒 in a day hospital setting. So you do have to do your practicum, but it is not the ComServe that the clinical psychologist would do.
Okay, so that is quite a big difference, because you would do your M1 and your M2 and then register with the 𝑃𝑠𝑦𝑆𝑆A and go on to be a private practitioner or whatever one would like to do with their degree. Okay, Joy asks, where can you study your honours equivalent? Joy, I can send you a list of universities and institutions in South Africa that offer the B-Psych and the B-Psych degree, the B-Psych equivalent degree. So I will be able to send you a list. Just to briefly explain the difference between an honours degree and a Bachelor of Psychology, the difference is the 720-hour practicum. An academic honours degree will not get you registration with the 𝐸𝑃𝑠𝑆A, whereas your Bachelor of Psychology is your academic honours degree with your 720-hour practicum. So that is a very big difference to consider when thinking about the difference between B-Psych, academic honours, and counselling psychology as masters. They're all totally different degrees. Okay, I am studying BA honours through UNISA. What are my pathways to becoming a counselling psychologist? That's Anisha.
Okay, and this is, I'm really glad you've had having this webinar, because that's where so many people become horribly unstuck. They start psychology with this view of becoming a psychologist, and the reality is very, very few people get selected to do their masters. So they get as far as honors, and where do they go to from there? They're so disillusioned with these institutions that are only accepting 5 or 6. I think the most in one program is about 8 at a time, of the thousands that are applying. So when you've got your honors, my advice when I do guidance counseling with students is to double it up with possibly a teaching major, so that you're broadening your scope as well, because you could then possibly teach and do the life orientation and counseling as a sideline, and then reapply at a later stage for your master's, because the selection process is incredibly tough. You've got to have such resilience to get through that. There's a lot of complaints about the process, that they say they break you down. It's actually just to check your own level of emotional strength. Can you deal with it? So very often the young person isn't fully equipped to do with it. So when you've got your honors, try and make sure that you've got a second major that can take you to a different stream. So you will still apply for your psychology, but you might have to take a longer route to get there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sharon. Is it possible to do the practicum component of the B-Psych only after doing my honors at UNISA? That's from Liz.
No, very few institutions will allow that, because the expense is the practicum component. So for every registered counselor that's doing their practicum, you've got somebody supervising their psychometrics, you've got somebody supervising them on site, you've got their academic supervisor, you've got somebody supervising their research module. So the cost for the practical component is incredibly high. So I don't know of institutions where you can say, I've done the theoretical part, I just need the hour exposure. It's very unlikely that any institution, I don't know of anybody. You can go to some institutions and say this is it, and they may give you credit for some of the subjects that you've got, but that will be determined by each institution.
Thank you, Sharon. Kelo has a question. Kelo, I've unmuted you. You can ask your question.
Kelo.
Hi.
Hi, Kelo.
I want to know, if I want to be a forensic psychologist, which other qualifications do I have? Currently, I'm busy with my honors with UNISA.
Okay, so forensic psychology is not yet an acknowledged category. Like neuropsych is only in the process of being registered. Forensic is also not yet sort of a registered category. What it is covering at this stage, you would do either clinical or counseling psychology, and then you do further courses in forensic, depending on where your field of expertise. So I've done quite a lot of forensic training because I work a lot with divorce, and the forensic component helps me to make guidance in terms of care, parental planning, parent contact arrangements. That takes on a forensic, so I'm informing the lawyers of my findings. Your clinical will take it far more in terms of, in a clinical setting, like for example, Oscar Pistorius will be assessed from a forensic point of view to see whether he's culpable of standing being accountable for charges. So that would take a role with sort of clinical and criminology. So you would get your first degree being first would be your honor, your BA, then your honors, then you get your masters, and then from your masters you will do additional training, but there's not yet the category for forensic. And as I'm saying, forensic has almost got two umbrellas, the one that's more involved with the divorce dynamic and parenting plans, and the other one that's more involved with the criminology component.
Thank you, Sharon.
Okay, thank you.
Kelo, does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks, Kelo.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have a question. Why is South Africa so limited with limited spaces for psychology degrees?
I really think a lot's got to do with the supervision that is needed. Your psychology, it's such an incredibly powerful position that you are in, that you have the ability to really destroy people if you are not effectively trained, because you're reaching people in their most vulnerable state. And if you are not adequately trained, if you don't know how to give bad news in a constructive way, you can destroy people. So your training and the supervision component, there's such a huge emphasis on that. And I think the expense in that is what makes it's just not viable that you can train 30 psychologists, whereas we can train larger numbers of registered counselors because we've limited their scope. So if you, as a registered counselor, if somebody is threatening suicide, you immediately have to contact a psychologist. So we do need more psychologists, but the expense to provide the training to make sure that once you're qualified, remember, once you're qualified, you're out there. You can do your own thing, and you can potentially do a lot of damage if your training hasn't been done properly.
That's a very, very good point. Here we go, Sipho.
Yes.
Hi, Sipho, welcome.
Yes, hi. Been here for a while.
Yes.
Just to correction, and then to add on to what Sharon is saying. I am no longer with UNISA. I'm at the University of Johannesburg. I'm a lecturer there, so just probably big note there. But also to add on to what Sharon is saying, that and I see somebody had put up on the chat there that New Zealand, for example, does tend to train higher numbers. So if you look at sort of globally, there are different trends and different levels of training that they are able to do. Some countries like the US, for example, to be a registered psychologist, you have to have a PhD. Yes. So there is training at the master's level, but it's not to be an independent sort of practitioner. And different states in the US have different rules. So some states allow for independent practice at master's level. Some states allow it only at PhD level. And this is quite important because students often sort of, when you Google how to become a psychologist, you'll see that Australia comes up, you'll see the US comes up, the UK comes up, and then students have the same expectation for South Africa. So that's that's sort of differentiation. But also the second bit is about subsidies, how different universities are subsidized, and that impacts on how many people can be trained. If you don't have enough subsidies for master's training, this is for public universities, you can't train a lot of people because you don't have enough people training. Like Sharon was saying, that it's about supervision also. Supervision is quite important because the intensity of the training at master's level in South Africa is dependent on the availability of supervisors. And a lot of people don't want to supervise, or a lot of people might not be able to give adequate supervision because they're busy with other things. And this is quite an important thing to always keep in mind. It's not that, I mean, there are other reasons that are historical that need to be addressed, but that students must know this, that it is important to look at requirements in South Africa and sort of try not to compare all too much with what's happening in other countries without looking at what it is that those countries are able to provide for those students and what those students are actually being trained for. So it might be that in New Zealand and in Australia, that at master's level, they're actually not being trained for independent practice as in a fully fledged psychologist. They might be being trained for other kinds of categories that they have. So this is an important thing. And also the 𝑃𝑠𝑦𝑆𝑆A by law doesn't allow certain numbers in sort of training because they worry that you might not be able to give adequate training. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. Thank you so much, Sipho. And what you've highlighted is so crucial with regards to the supervision. And I think that is a very, very good point. And also different countries, very interesting to see how in one country, as Sipho said, one has to have a PhD, whereas in another, that is not the case. I think if we can all move on to the second link piece, I have posted it in the chat. Can you confirm if there's anyone that hasn't got the link, if you can raise your hand? We do have 5 minutes left, but to get into the next question, let's rather move over first. Does everyone have the link and the ID and password? If you don't, you can raise your hand.
No, I don't.
You don't? Okay, I'll send it. I'll put it on the group.
Okay.
There you go. Okay.
Okay.
Right, so I'm going to end this meeting now and we'll see you all in the next chat.
Okay, all right.
Thanks, everyone.